you all so much for taking the time to come together and talk a little bit about the next fall play that is coming up. I want to start by introducing you all and maybe talking a bit about what led you and what compelled you to spend some time talking today. So I'm going to start with Reverend Jen Raffensperger.
Hi, thank you. I'm very glad to be here with you all today and to talk about this lovely play and this great topic. I am the minister of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of York. I am relatively new to the congregation and to York itself. I am joining you virtually today from my home in Maryland. I will be making the transition up there soon. I am excited to be talking about this topic because I think this is a key part of my own faith journey. I found my faith community at home through some activism for marriage equality in Maryland. And the chance, when this chance was offered to me to speak about this topic as addressed in the themes of this quite layered play, I was eager to become a part of the conversation. So thank you for having me.
Now we'll spend a little time hearing from Reverend Eva O'Diam.
Hi, I am the pastor of Dover United Church of Christ in Dover, Pennsylvania. I've been here for about 6 years, but my interest in participating in this discussion probably has to do with my journey of how I ended up here, because this is my third denomination. I started out with the Church of the Brethren and had my ordination removed by them because of being lesbian. And in searching for a church home, I found Metropolitan Community Church, and I pastored the Metropolitan Community Church in Harrisburg for 17 years. While there, I had the play brought up a lot of past experiences for me. Why Dover? And they said, you have to meet the congregation. And I came here and met a congregation that is open and affirming, is what we call it in the United Church of Christ. They went through a lay-led process, deciding that it was important to them that no matter what your race, no matter what your creed, no matter where you find yourself on your spiritual journey, you would be welcome in this place.
My name is Betsy McCormick. I am an ordained pastor in the Presbyterian Church USA, and my wife is Mary Almy. She is transgender, and in 2020, I was hired by Wellspan York Hospital to be the manager of spiritual care and education. And at the same time, I'm in a certified educator candidacy process. I'm in the training to be a certified educator a certified educator for the Association of Clinical Pastoral Education. So I'm working with students who are learning to be chaplains in hospitals. It's to provide that interfaith, non-denominational, non-judgmental. It really is to provide that spiritual care and emotional care for each and every patient, family, and staff we have here at the hospital.
Hi, my name is Taliaferro. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the president of the Rainbow Rose Center, which serves York County's LGBTQIA+ community. And I am very excited to be part of this conversation because a lot of the themes that are going on in this play are points that members of the community often reach out to us about. Parts about how they can live their lives openly and safely, but also find that acceptance within their families, their communities, their healthcare providers, as well as their religious communities. And so it's an honor to be able to speak to that today. And as a man of faith, as a Unitarian Universalist, with Reverend Jen being my new minister at the UUCY, it's important to be able to talk about what it means to be queer as an openly transgender, gay, or queer and polyamorous man, what it means to be queer and religious.
Hello, everyone. I'm directing this play, and it came to me during the pandemic when DreamWrights was doing some Zoom play readings to possibly select shows for their current season. And I, just knowing nothing about the play, signed up to be one of the readers and was blown away, even though we were stumbling through it and we didn't know one another and it was very rough. I just knew that had to be the play that I directed. I just fell in love with it. I applaud DreamWrights for using this as their first show back in their new season. And when I direct a play, I have 3 criteria. I want to laugh, I want to cry, and I want to give the audience something to think about. And this hits all those 3 items.
Thank you so much, Jaci. And my name is Dionna. I am the Director of Community Conversations at York College of Pennsylvania Center for Community Engagement. I will be moderating the conversation today. So we'll be able to start out by just kind of talking a little bit about what is the next fall play about.
At its heart, it is a love story between 2 men. We begin at the end of their story, and we get to see their relationship unfold from the time they met one another until the present time. They have their relationship is complicated, as all relationships are. One of the partners is a man of faith, the other is not. One of the partners has not come out as openly gay. It opens with an accident, though. One of the men is in an accident, and every other scene takes place in the waiting room of the hospital. And so they're struggling with that gentleman's immediate health concerns, but they're also struggling. We also see them in their relationship struggling with their differences in religion, with their differences in coming out. And it's just beautiful. It is just stunningly beautiful, very raw, very honest.
Thank you so much for sharing that. For the purpose of this conversation, the themes were kind of broken down into four emerging or kind of main themes that are really going to guide the conversations that we have today. And so the first is faith, religion, and spirituality, of course. The second is identity and beliefs. The third is relationships and family. And the fourth theme is death and dying. So we're going to start by kind of talking a little bit about the faith, religion, and spirituality. And I'm going to read a little excerpt that I was provided. In the play, there's a scene where Adam finds out the new guy he is seeing is a Christian. When confronted with the fact that Christians consider homosexuality a sin, Luke responds, "We're all sinners. We all struggle with one thing or another. This just happens to be mine." Later on, elaborating, "It's human nature, Adam. We can't escape it. But as long as you have accepted Christ." So I'd love your thoughts on this idea of, can a person be gay and religious at the same time?
Yes. One of the things I struggle with in the play is that the fact that Christians consider homosexuality a sin, and not all Christians consider homosexuality a sin. That's where I begin, because for me, homosexuality is not a sin. It's who God created me to be. And I spend hours and hours, and I've spent years upon years trying to teach that homosexuality is not a sin, that sin is brokenness, and sin is somehow missing the mark. And I missed the mark when I tried to convince myself I was heterosexual. I didn't miss the mark when I came to terms with the fact that I was lesbian, and that that's who God created me to be. And so someone, yes, can be a person of faith and can be gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender.
What we need to take into consideration is that where people are pulling these religious arguments against homosexuality comes from a book which has been translated hundreds and hundreds of times over. The original translations were not for it. The original writing was not against homosexuality, but truly against pedophilia, because the Greeks had a culture that often included that as part of their culture. However, when in the New Testament, when Christ is speaking about the community, specifically in Matthew chapter 8, verse 12, Christ says that there were men, or there were people who were born eunuchs. Or let me read it correctly, sorry. So, there are those who are born eunuchs, and there are those eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by others, and there are those who choose to live as eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. For the one who can accept this should accept it. Now, the term eunuch back in the day wasn't used against someone or for somebody who wasn't born with genitalia. It was specifically meant for people who were born gay. And so Christ is recognizing that those are a part of God's creation, and he's honoring them alongside of people who also choose to live a celibate life for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. And so I think it's really key that we really acknowledge what language we are using and how we are interpreting the texts.
Definitely the view of religion that we have in the play is a very fundamentalist, very hopefully outdated, as I believe, view of your sexuality.
What do you think it is about difficult moments that bring people back to faith practices, like faith practices that you swore away even? Like, what is it about tough times or things that we experience that you think tends to lead people back to unearth those things?
If we are raised in a family that trains us to kneel before the bedside and say a certain child's bedtime prayer, or to say grace before a meal, or to reach for a rosary beads in my Catholic home, right? Like there are, or to cross myself, right? The character in the play says crossing myself. And, when I joke about blessing people, my hand still wants to make and I'm not blessing people who can definitely say are in a Christian context. There are many people who come into my church. I can't bless them with a cross. It's not even, it's no longer fully my own spirituality either. But it's my embodied spirituality and the way I was taught to be a person of faith when I was very small. So those motions and those ideas still come to me, especially in times of stress, when our top part of our brain may be too caught up with the stress. And so the part of our brain that is just like, what is a comforting thing for me to do? I'm going to grab a stuffed animal. I'm going to pray the rosary. I'm going to cross. Like all of these things are things we learn. And yes, and then in the shift, those are the questions. Like, what happens when we die? Right? Which is very deep in the concern of these two men in this relationship in this play, both because the one character is a hypochondriac, right? And so is always worrying about health and all of these, like, what is wrong with me? I'm Googling symptoms, and never Google symptoms, by the way. But and our faith and our beliefs, just like our identities, are always shifting. I'm so glad that that y'all named that you don't just come out once and done. That stillness is antithetical, like lack of growth and lack of change is antithetical to all life. So if we aren't changing and growing, we have words for things around sexual identity, attractional identity, gender identity that just did not exist when I was the age of the characters in this play, of the younger characters in this play.
We talk about how God is a God of love. The idea that it could be a sin for two individuals of the same gender to love one another is just beyond my comprehension. That I could never see God condemning any of his children, let alone children who are celebrating life and love for each other, which is in itself an honor to their creator.
The question that's here is, like, what defines who you are? And you specifically are just kind of in the abstract. We as people, what defines us? You pick. But, and how much does a person's religious beliefs or sexuality make up their identity, or does it?
I think that's extremely individualized. I think the only person who defines who they are is that individual.
Mm-hmm.
And what is important to them is dependent on the situation.
Yeah.
There are some people like myself who are openly out and queer, and that is a major part of our identities. And there's other people who truly dismiss and don't use labels because it's not the type of person they are. And both identities are extremely and equally valid.
Yeah, I used to tell, well, I still tell people, I used to do it more frequently, that in the same way that we will come out for the rest of our lives, people will always be coming out about different things the rest of their lives. Every one of us has to make decisions about how much of our personal life we're going to share in all kinds of situations. And that could have to do whether we're divorced or whether we're polyamorous or whether we're, all kinds of things, whether we like dogs or cats or hate animals altogether. Those are things that we all have to decide. And so that's an ongoing process, in part, of our identity and claiming what it is it's important to us to claim.
And the fact that the world is always shifting and moving and changing. And, I think when this play was written, I don't think marriage equality had been passed at that point. So there's so much context, I think, sometimes too, that happens globally,
right.
We are, that we can then be responsive. And sometimes that representation we talk about leads credence to these discoveries and this kind of like growth mindset or growth place that we're in. So that is so, so important.
Our identities aren't set in stone. We don't come out and that's the end of it. We will be coming out for the rest of our lives. We will be who we are. Just as people grow in various different ways, spiritually, physically, emotionally, mentally, so do our identities. And so I have only recently come out as polyamorous, but I've been transgender for 3 years, but I spent 27 of my years of my life as a cisgendered heterosexual woman. So I know I'm not done. And I know that no member of our community or no member of humanity is finished in setting their identity.
We're going to talk a little bit now about the kind of relationships and family. I know I've been hopping around. I keep saying we're going to talk about this one theme, but they're all interrelated. So in the play, Brandon believes that a line is crossed at love, and he really only allows himself to have physical relationships with men, saying, okay, this is where my line in the sand is. I'm not going to cross that. This kind of compartmentalizing that Brandon's doing, is this kind of just done in the play? Do you find that this happens in real life? I would love your thoughts on kind of this particular aspect.
I think it's something that we do see within the LGBTQIA community, and I think it harkens back a lot to the rejection that many members have experienced within their own families and from their own loved ones, that it's easier for them to decide not to love, because how do we really keep ourselves from loving someone that they're willing to have that affection, they're willing to have those physical relationships. But I think, at least from my own personal experience, there's going to come a point where that grows into something more. I mean, some people may truly just experience that on a physical level.
It's not something I've ever identified. Well, I can't say that. There was a point in my life where I would have identified with that, where I was tired of relationships failing. And so what I thought I'd do is just have a lot of relationships. And then I wouldn't have to get tied down, except I met the person that I eventually have been with now for the last 30 years. But I can remember in the midst of the beginning of that relationship, we were just telling some of these stories not long ago, of things happening where I was afraid the relationship would dissolve because of something seemingly very little that I did, but because that's the way relationships were. that, when you hit the rust patch, that didn't last. And so I think that is a reality. And I think a lot of it has to do with when we're not accepting ourselves and who we are, then how can we expect someone else to do that?
I love what Eva just said there, because it's something I personally also ascribe to, that there's no way that you can expect someone to love you if you cannot love yourself. And so again, like she said, just if you can accept your own identity, if you can love yourself for who you are, faults and failings and all, you open yourself up to the love that another person might have for you. So Brandon's ability to say, oh, I just won't love anyone, is it really about his inability to love someone else, or is it his inability to love himself? And where does that come from? Does that come from that rejection, the fact that that unconditional love that's supposed to come from family, was that denied him, so he finds himself unworthy of love?
Right.
We as an acting exercise, I had the actors say one thing that they thought their characters were most afraid of. And the gentleman who plays the Brandon character mentioned that he definitely thinks that Brandon is just afraid of exposing himself and of someone seeing him for who he really is. So again, in that respect, we all can identify with having a feeling like that. Loving someone is exposing yourself to the core of who you are, and many people cannot take that step.
Well, I appreciate so much that what I see happening as well, and I really am valuing and honoring everything that's being shared so far, is that needing that layer of protection, the armor that becomes a shield and a barrier, because the trust has been violated. So a lot of this acceptance is really, I can't trust someone to really mean what they say and say what they mean. And if that's been violated at any point with family, especially, it would be hard not to have that, to be that vulnerable.
Everyone said wonderful things. I don't have that much to add, but it truly, compartmentalization truly can be a trauma response, right? Like if Brandon has gotten one message from family and the same message from religious community and all these places that are supposed to be a source of love, comfort, certainty, then if he wants to hold on to that despite what his being is telling him, i.e., I am attracted to a man, compartmentalizing sexuality, and Tesla, I agree. I think it's different I think there are people who truly can separate physical intimacy and emotional intimacy. I don't happen to be one of them, but everyone's got their own path, right? And so I can see where if you think that's the only way to keep yourself from harm, you tell yourself you're going to do that, and then when you can't actually do it, there's just Eva, the journey towards wholeness, right? Like that's a break within the self.
I'm not a member of the LGBTQ plus community, but there's parts of myself that I compartmentalize in order to be more palatable or more well received. So it's very different than somebody's, journey in their identity in that capacity, but it's similar in other ways, and kind of in that we're going through different journeys of processes. And I think you touched on something that Betsy.
Yeah.
Where you said, armor is a shield and a barrier. Like, I think that was just so spot on and poignant of what we see through this whole play, not just in relation to the two interacting together, but just throughout relationships and kind of shields and barriers from different things. So I think that is just, it was just really, really powerful. So thank you all for sharing all of that. What are your own beliefs? on the afterlife, or this kind of this place that he talks about them two being together and achieving?
For me, I mean, it's all around me. I can see evidence, especially in the fall, of how life ends and it begins again in the spring. So you can see all kinds of evidence from creation that certainly life continues after life as a leaf has known it, or as I have known it.
The topic of death and dying, I know, is even in a hospital setting, and when the situation is dire, it really is a conversation they still do not want to have. There is the hope beyond hope that this is just going to be, that they're going to be wanting a miracle, that they really just don't want to have that tough conversation.
That it was really important that Betsy get to say, so as the chaplain, like I know. So thank you for being someone who's training to be a clinical pastoral education educator, because as a minister who had to go through a unit of clinical pastoral education, it was one of the most formative parts of how I show up in the world as a minister, especially at times like end of life and those and the conversations that I would love to encourage people to have before we are at end of, like, could we talk about dying before we're dying?
Yes.
Right. And in the play specifically, I know they're talking about it. Adam has hypochondria. Luke wants them to be together in heaven, but they're not talking about it in word choice is important. They're not talking about it in practical ways. Those are abstractions.
Right.
I might have a headache, or I might have brain cancer, because I Googled it, or this might happen if I die. What if we die at the same time and I've accepted Christ and you haven't? Like, these are abstractions. And if we talk about what we want to happen, what do we want ourselves and our soul to be prepared for when we die? And what do we want to happen to our bodies? Right, Eva, I'm with you. I think it's kind of, I'm certain that there is life after death. I'm just pretty uncertain that there's my life after my death.
The idea of when the life comes to the end and what that means for the one who remains. I mean, I know when I first started dating my partner, Charles, even on our first date, my first thoughts when we were reading together at the UUCY was, what will I say at his eulogy? And that sounds very morbid, but for the people who know me, it was actually very comforting to think about that if I were to spend, and I hope to spend the rest of his life with him, or the rest of my life with him as my nesting partner, depending on which of us goes first, that we have an understanding.
So you talk about death and dying. Not all of those deaths are physical end of life. They are also these markers of life where something died in terms of a relationship, or in terms of this old identity. And something, and maybe, as you were suggesting, Eva, there was something new that came from that death. So that there are even those life experiences that feel like death and dying, and helping each other move through some of those events might help for the final one that we all will encounter.
In partnership with DreamWrights Community Center for the Arts, they will be hosting the Rainbow Rose Center's Transgender Day of Remembrance Vigil on November 20th. We will be remembering those gender non-conforming individuals who this year, there's been 40 individuals that we know of who have been murdered. And I say that we know of because there are so many crimes which are underreported, or which the police cover up the true identity of that individual by dead naming them or putting down the wrong gender marker, or the families do so for the exact same reasons that Betsy was saying, that they didn't want to recognize them for who they truly were. And so we'll be recognizing at least 40 individuals, but there are so many more.
They talk a little bit about a DNR, or like a do not resuscitate, and life support. And there were kind of some conversations or some discussion points of, is that right? Is that wrong? As you look to, like, is that godly? Is there something that's more godly? As you kind of grapple with those decisions, is there kind of a thought or a stance that you all have as it relates to DNRs in the faith-based community?
This is why we have the conversations before the beloved is on the ventilator. Ideally, in an ideal world, then before we have to have the conversation about, do you have an advance directive? Because each person's idea of it is so individualized, I think that is another reason I got frustrated in this play, as I often do in plays about human relationships, about everything that wasn't being said.
The fact that we come out is because we're ready to live our authentic lives. And I think having our documents, our advance directives prepared, getting our affairs set in order, that's taking control of our death too. Yes. We get to own our lives, our stories, and our deaths.
Do not put something off until next fall, because one doesn't know when that next fall will happen. And I think that resonates with me, and hopefully will resonate with the audience. Just a reminder, a gentle reminder.
Going to be lots of different people, hopefully, who see this play with all different understandings and levels of comfort and familiarity with the LGBTQ plus community. And so, for people who are seeing this play, who walk away from it, what do you hope? And I'm putting you on the spot here a little. This wasn't on the list, but what do you hope people, or some person, others, a group, you define it, but what do you hope people walk away with, knowing or feeling or understanding about whether the play or the community in general, or not in general, but you know what I'm trying to ask. Like, what do you hope people walk away with?
I hope it creates conversation around all kinds of things, the kinds of things we've talked about. What is sin? and what is it we believe, and how can we live out our authentic selves, no matter who you are? And how can we allow each other the freedom to be our authentic selves, so that we're not caught in situations like this couple find themselves in?
I truly hope people walk away with empathy, not just for the LGBTQ community, not just for the dying, but just for humanity.
I hope it will generate some conversations among families.
All of those things are absolutely my hope, as well as a sense of empathy that these people in the play are more like the audience than they had maybe thought when they came in and sat down.
I also hope people come away with a sense of what a gift to every human relationship forthrightness and self-knowledge can be. That we didn't bring that up as much when we were talking about to truly love another, you must truly love yourself, is that part of loving yourself is knowing the places where you fail, the places where you fall short of the mark, and knowing those things about yourself and being able to communicate them to partners. And I know, just honest, frank, open sharing, if you're willing to be, everybody makes their decisions on who they're intimate with and what they share with. But if someone's going to be your partner in life and you want them at your dying bedside, just honesty and willing to explore things that feel scary or challenging.
Is there anything that any of you want to share with the people who will be watching this that maybe isn't directly related to some of these things we talked about?
If they really need to reach out to someone, Rainbow Rose Center clergy, faith community leaders, hospital chaplains. I mean, the list can go on. Case managers. I mean, there are all kinds of resources out there. Don't go through this alone, because you're not alone.
These issues matter. It's not about whether we have someone who is gay or lesbian or transgendered or questioning in our families that need to come out. We need to be protecting our students in schools and in our communities. And so we need to be talking about these issues in all kinds of places, especially with the elections coming up.
And really appreciate this opportunity, especially as a newcomer to York and to the York faith-based communities and the community in general. That I'm excited that this is happening. I'm so excited that DreamWrights is putting this play on. Thank you, Jaci, for having that vision and saying yes to it when you did the read-throughs. I'm excited for people to hear this conversation, and I'm glad that the resources will be shared, because I always welcome further conversation. And I think Pastor Eva mentioned affirming, welcoming congregations do exist. If you Google those particular keywords, they are a way to find spaces. If you feel called to explore anything about your faith past or interests in, not that that's not going to appeal to everyone. And I'm so glad there are also all of these other resources and supports within the community, like Rainbow Rose Center.
Especially for members of the LGBTQIA+ community, they can reach out to the Rainbow Rose Center in any form, whether that's email, phone, or through Facebook Messenger. Our resource specialists are happy to get people connected to those resources that they need, not only to thrive, but to have a dignified and honorable death in a way that they want to have that. And also just to thrive during life as well here in York County. We're here to help connect you with those mental health care providers, as well as like physical health care providers, affirming religious communities as well as businesses. We're here to support you, and we're glad to be here with you.
So next fall opens on November 4th and runs until November 7th at DreamWrights Center for Community Arts in York, PA. There will be an in-person talkback featuring many of the speakers featured in this conversation after the Saturday, November 6th show performance. Tickets are on sale now online for $15, or you can also purchase them at the door for $17. We thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this amazing conversation. Thank you so much to our panelists who took the time to just share their insights, their knowledge, and most importantly, their lived experiences. We so appreciate you coming together, and thank you to DreamWrights for putting on this production, this very, very important topic.